This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 478 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and it's a snowy day in Colorado today as I was driving down here to Boulder, Colorado. Lots and lots of heavy, wet snow, pulling some trees down. Kind of a weird one for May. But my reason for the trip was to pop down here to the Brewers Association office. Joining me today is Bart Watson, CEO of the Brewers Association. Welcome to the podcast, Bart.
Thanks for coming down. I appreciate you joining us.
This is actually my first time here in the Brewers Association office, even though I will say we have been members of the Brewers Association since we started this business in late 2013 and have a great working relationship. We sponsor things that you guys do. You sponsor things that we do. And, we're all here for the same cause.
Well, always glad we get a member here for the first time. If you're a BA member and you're listening, we'd love you to visit us in Boulder. Come, we'll have a beer at the bar. It'll be great.
Heck yeah. So, recently, Bart, we had CBC a couple weeks ago. You gave a state of the industry presentation as you do every year. And, then, of course, it drove some feedback. There was also a media event and saw a number of stories that were trying to unpack some of the stuff going around it. And I thought rather than try to write a story around it, why don't we just have a conversation about it? Why don't we talk about it, directly and try to understand what some of these things mean? Because this is an interesting time for craft beer. I think, as we have said many times, multiple things can be true. It can be a hard business, but it can also be one of the best times in history for beer itself. And I think that, as I have said recently here on the podcast and numerous times, like as a beer drinker and as a beer maker, there are few times in history, in the entire history of industrialized beer production, that have been as good as it is right now, even if it is hard to sell beer in certain places, in certain, kinds of ways, in certain kind of retail chains or whatever that is. And so I think we need to look at this state of the industry in this kind of holistic sense, and not just simply repeat the narrative that things are down or this is the end or death. We tend to talk in such extreme white or black terms, binaries. And I think the truth can just be more nuanced than that, and multiples of these can be true. And you are trying to make that point, and you've been trying to use that data to support that point. So I want to talk about some of that data because, there isn't just one story going on here.
Yeah, 100%. And first, let me say how novel to sit down and talk things through face to face. You should have done it the way we do things today, yelled about it on social media. So we'll try that next time, and we'll see if that works better. But yeah,
you should have seen. I was going to write create an Instagram post with me commenting on top of you, a picture of you. But no, instead of that, we're just going to have a thoughtful, longer conversation and try to dive into the corners of some of this.
Well, wonderful. Well, I love that. I love too the premise you're coming at, which is there's always more than a single narrative. And I always struggle with this. I led the BA for a number of years, but before that was the chief economist, and always thought about that as we put out our numbers, how hard it is to boil down the story of 9,000 plus breweries, 100 million plus beer drinkers to a few numbers in terms of what did production do, what did opening and closings do, and how much nuance, how much is going on underneath those top line numbers that affect how we should be thinking about it, affect, different trends for different types of businesses, for different regions, for different styles of beer, for different ages of beer drinkers. And one of the things I really tried to focus on CBC this year, because we've had the dominant narrative be such a doom and gloom one, was focus on more of the positives. And, being that we're a business association and CBC is a business event, that took a business lens. But I think you can do that more broadly in a lot of different places, that there's a lot of positivity right now in beer that runs counter to that kind of overall doom and gloom negative. And that's not to say it's not a challenging time. It's not a competitive time. It is. It's a hard time to be in business. Costs are going up. There's more options than ever before. Distributors are consolidating. So there's a lot of reasons it's tough to run a business right now. But that's very different than no one is being successful, no one's drinking craft beer anymore, or this kind of overall craft beer is dying, when we've still got 9,000 plus breweries. We got more craft beer drinkers than ever before. And, the vibe at CBC was very positive because there's lots of people who are navigating that tough environment, being very successful, growing their brands, growing their breweries. And I'm excited that's our role to tell that story.
And we're going to talk about some of the data that supports that because, if you were to just look at some of the headlines out there, you would think that 100% of craft breweries are down, that it is 100% down. And the reality is that it's about 60% down and about 39% up and about 1% flat. And that's not like, how do you boil that narrative down into a headline? It is hard to do that for a consumer audience. But that is the reality here. And I think CBC kind of self-selected out for some of those brewers who were on that. But I got the exact same vibe that the folks that were there did. They were in a different place. It felt like there was an energy going in a different direction. And I think that if we, as we unpack some of the other numbers that are going on in craft beer right now, we're going to see, I think we now, as of first quarter, probably have some picture of where our floor is going to be on this kind of correction. And I don't think it's going to be, it's not, it would be ridiculous to even call it the end of beer because we're up like 400-ish% from where we were in the late 2000s. We're up so much as an entire category and as a number of breweries and everything. Anyway, we'll talk about what that data is that supports some of these arguments so that we can be more nuanced about the positivity. But there's a lot to be positive about. Before we do that,
hey there, Justin from G&D Chillers. Sustainability isn't just a buzzword, it's a necessity for breweries today. That's why we've engineered solutions like the Elite 290 Micro Series, running on natural refrigerants with near zero GWP.
G&D's new Elite 290 Micro Series is built for brewers who care about sustainability and performance. It runs on a natural refrigerant with near zero global warming potential, has a compact footprint, and features variable speed fans for efficiency. They've chilled beer for over 3,000 breweries across North America, and with 24/7 support and remote monitoring, your cold side stays dialed in day or night. Get the details on natural refrigerant technology at gdchillers.com/podcast. And Berkeley Yeast just launched Dry Tropics London, their best-selling liquid yeast strain now with all the ease-of-use benefits of dry yeast. Dry Tropics London delivers the soft, pillowy mouthfeel and juicy character you'd expect from a top-tier London ale strain, but with a serious upgrade, a burst of thiols that unleash vibrant, layered notes of grapefruit and passion fruit. A lot of brewers love the clean passion fruit you get from Tropics, but they don't want every IPA to be a tropical fruit bomb. At the dry yeast price point, you can pitch and ditch without breaking the bank, or you can co-pitch with your house strain to adjust the intensity of the notes. And with nationwide free shipping, there's never been a better time to try Dry Tropics. Order now at berkeleyyeast.com and experience the ease and impact of Dry Tropics London yeast. Also, this episode is sponsored by PackTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PackTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PackTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit packtech-opi.com. That's PAKTECH-OPI.com. All right, Bart. Let's start unpacking some of the numbers. You all every year survey craft beer makers. Yeah, some members, some aren't members, but lots of the industry as a whole likes to share those numbers, and they have created somewhat of a benchmark that allows us to look at where we are as a broader industry in the United States year over year. Obviously, craft beer is bigger than just the United States. There is other data that can feed into this. We're seeing lots of growth and interest outside of the United States. 25% of the listeners of this podcast are outside of the United States. But for the sake of looking at craft beer, and the access to data that you all have this unique source. Talk about what you all were tracking this year in that data set of craft beer production numbers and what craft brewers in the United States are saying to you.
Yeah, so we've done this every year since the mid 1980s. I think it was a little bit easier back then when Charlie would just pick up the phone and call the 25 breweries he needed to call and get the numbers. But we try to do this comprehensive look, going beyond survey, and we survey, but we also fill in the gaps with state excise tax data, other estimates, media reports, all sorts of stuff. And what we're really looking at are just kind of a headline performance numbers on brewery production. We do gather some other data on other things that breweries do and do some other benchmarking throughout the year. And then things like openings and closings. And because of the data we have, that we can then break that apart by category. What we found this year was a challenging landscape. I think that's obvious to anyone who's been following the category. We've seen our consumer survey work too, that supply and demand have been imbalanced for the last couple of years, with production down 5%. So that's kind of the headline number. But then as we dig in under that number, we found that hospitality breweries were doing better. Brew pubs doing the best, with tap rooms still better than that 5% number, but better than the category average, not quite as good as brew pubs. And then production breweries, those wider distributed breweries, they were the ones we really saw the challenges with. Regionals doing a little bit better than microbreweries. Regionals in our data set are above 15,000 barrels. So think a brewery that's either total state, multi-state, a little bit more scale. Given what's going on in distribution, makes sense. They're doing a little bit better as people rationalize their portfolios, retailers cut SKUs, people are looking for tried and true a little bit more out there. And then microbreweries, which are small production breweries, having the worst numbers. So, right off the bat, a lot of variation in that number. Boiling it down to 5% doesn't give the full range of experience we see. And even within those types, then there's a lot of variation. So, at a top line, when we're just talking about production numbers, and you already mentioned this, we found that about 40% of breweries were up. Now, that means about 60% of breweries were down. So that's not the ratio that we would like to see. But it again suggests there's a range of experience and that there are breweries that even in this tough environment are finding ways to navigate, finding ways to grow their brewery, grow their brand. The other thing that we're tracking when we do that, and we're doing this all the time, but people like years, and so it's good to package them into a year, is openings and closings. We found about 300 openings, about 500 closings. Those numbers tend to shift a little bit over time. But, the story I told at CBC, the openings is a continued decline. We've seen that year over year, and I think that makes sense, right? Opening in a crowded market is tough, but there are still openings, right? You're getting almost one a day in the U.S. breweries opening. I try to watch that brewery tracking channel that we have, and you still see it this year. Every year, there's people opening, even in competitive markets. I saw one that is opening in San Diego the other day. So even in crowded competitive markets, people see opportunity and are opening. And that closing,
and some of that is reflects some turnover too. That there are brewery locations that are closing, and new and other existing or more successful or better capitalized or maybe even like more brand awareness type breweries who are moving into those same locations and and building, adding to their business by taking some of those over.
Yeah, and a lot of them reflect the success stories. A lot of them are second locations because a brewery says, "Hey, this is working," and so now we see an opportunity to open a new location somewhere. So some of it's new entrepreneurs coming in, and some of it's people who say, "Hey, this is working really well for us, and we want to spread out." And then,
but a net decline of 200 breweries out of 9,500 doesn't feel like the death of craft beer, Bart.
No, it doesn't. And, I like to compare this. I've been getting this question for a decade. How many breweries can we take? Are there too many breweries? And I've always compared it to restaurants, right? Because most of these breweries, brew pubs and tap rooms are small, hospitality focused. They're serving a neighborhood, maybe a city at most. They're not drawing from, even a state population. And, when you think about it like a restaurant, well, what happens when a restaurant closes? And why did that restaurant close? Well, maybe it didn't serve the best food. Maybe it's serviced. Maybe it didn't pick a good location. There's a million reasons you can come up with why a restaurant closes that have nothing to do with, people don't eat anymore or people don't go out to eat. And so I think, this is the same way that people should think about it for most breweries is, yes, some are going to close and more are going to close than open in a market like we have right now. But that doesn't mean that the model as a whole doesn't work or that it's going away. It just means it needs to change. It needs to adapt, that the ones who are, doing, I won't say the worst, but, have the most pressure because they picked a tough location. They took on too much debt. They had the wrong partners. They picked the wrong food truck. Pick your reason. Those are the ones who are going to get cut first. And in a good market over time, they're going to get replaced with new, exciting people who bring in new ideas or operators who are opening that second or third location and know how to do it better. And we're going to see this ratio turn around. And I would expect that to happen in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, and it's, I mean, I hate to use that term, creative destruction, but I mean, that is kind of the nature of it as things grow more competitive. And I think that's a good word to describe it. And we say competitive just purely in a business sense, not, I mean, the beautiful thing about the craft beer community of brewers is that, yes, everyone is competitive. We see that in the way that people enter their beers and want to win medals at the World Beer Cup or the Great American Beer Festival. That competition is a key piece of making the entire enterprise healthier, stronger, and that's striving to be better and to outperform your peers and produce the absolute best thing that you can. It's a beautiful drive, and that's what has helped make all of this better for people who drink beer. And that competition exists also in the business sense, and that people are trying to be, create more efficient businesses, increase that top line revenue by growing the amount of business, reduce the inefficiencies that, increase the profitability for that business, but maintaining that quality is important, and doing that in a collaborative way with other craft brewers so that the entire breadth of the consumer base believes in the broader meta brand of craft beer is also an important piece of this. So when we say competition, it's not, cutthroat capitalism, destroy each other. It is how do we, compete in a friendly way with other like-minded folks to help make all of this enterprise a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I have stayed, here at the Brewers Association and this industry so long is it's so wonderfully collaborative. There's still that rising tide raises all boats spirit. People understand that collective brand, in addition to their individual brands, matter, and so quality is a piece of that. And I think one of the things we're really seeing in this moment right now is brewers are trying to do all the things you talked about. They're trying to raise quality. They're trying to improve efficiency. They're trying to eliminate those points of waste or inefficiency that they have, and then they're also trying to find their own unique path. And this is another thing that I really tried to stress at CBC is, I think one of the things we saw over the last decade is, craft maybe got a little too complacent in all following the same playbook. When you go back to, where craft started, it was doing something different. It was finding a new, unique path. And one of the lessons of markets is as they get more competitive, again, we've talked about what competitive means in this context, but as they get more competitive and you get more entrants, it becomes more and more important to do things that differentiate yourself, that make you stand out. And, in my talk at CBC, I gave the example of just kind of thinking about beer styles where you go back 30, 40 years, you made an ale, you were unique. And then it was, I've made an IPA. And then it was, I made a double IPA. And now I've made a double IPA that has these specific hops or, maybe hits a different ABV point or has another flavor point. And you fast forward to today, and to stand out in IPA, you've got to be thinking about your format, the channel you're selling it, how it's marketed and branded, the ingredients. I mean, there's so many things that layer on top of each other that become important, or you're just another local IPA. And you can win there too, right? If you have the right audience and but it's much, much harder than it used to be to stand out there. And I think this is the challenge.
So now we have craft brewers pouring Czech lager out of Lucre faucets in order to, making their own version of a beer that, a large macro brewery in the United States sells an immense amount of. And, and so I think it bears mentioning that there is a very long tail to this number of breweries that you're talking about. I think it was last year, the year before, I kind of pulled some of these numbers apart and did a infographic around it. But you look at the 90th percentile of breweries, and so 90% of breweries, and I think that 90th percentile is at about 1,300 barrels a year. So 90% of these breweries that we're talking about make 1,300 barrels of beer per year or less. And that 50th percentiles is 300 something.
Yeah.
So half of all breweries that we're talking about in this 9,500 number make 350 barrels of beer or less. That is only serving a market in their own tap room, generally speaking. That beer, if you're making 350 barrels, it's hard to send any beer outside of your own four walls.
Yeah.
And so even when we talk about fluctuations in the number of operating breweries, some of that can be misleading because you're talking about such small businesses and it gets really noisy in there. Maybe we'll unpack that for a minute, but first, Oregon hop country is heaven to world-class lager varieties, and Indy Hops is proud to have introduced Oregon's newest lager hop, Lorien, in 2022. Lorien is a growing list of beers that have found their way to the podium and, more importantly, into the hearts of lager lovers across the country. Discover Indy Hops Lorien. Side effects may include rampant festivity, sales bumps, and exceeded expectations. Indy Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And this podcast is sponsored by the Midea 50/50 Flex, the industry's first dual-compartment three-way convertible freezer. The 50/50 Flex is designed to flex with your life. It can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Plus, with reversible doors and adjustable storage compartments, you can stay organized no matter your food storage needs. The 50/50 Flex is also designed to maintain a stable temperature even in non-climate controlled spaces. So it's perfect for your garage, man cave, or wherever you need a little more space. Maybe use all 20 cubic feet as a beer fridge. Check out midea.com/US for more information on how to take your beer storage to the next level. Also, the Beyond Beer space is booming, and Old Orchard is here for it, supplying breweries with fruit ingredients for all your beverage needs. Low, no alcohol, hard lemonade, seltzer, cider, and more. Old Orchard has supplied hundreds of industrial customers across 49 states, including nationally and internationally loved brands, so you'll be in good company. More information and free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. So this long tail to breweries, I think, you're an economist by training and obviously now a business leader. But looking at that data, you have to, as it gets that small and, it gets noisier and you expect some, more motion in those kinds of numbers.
Yeah, the long tail has always been fascinating because people really want to talk about the number of breweries, and I don't think they've fully wrapped their head around what they contribute in terms of volume. And that long tail is obviously incredibly relevant in terms of what it adds to beer culture, in terms of touch points and local communities. But the stat that I've used for years is when you take the bottom 75% of breweries, you add them all together, so this is collectively, they make about 0.5% of the beer in the United States. So you add up, take 75% of breweries, draw a line, they make about the same as Sierra Nevada makes. And Sierra Nevada, in the context of the U.S. brewing market, again, is tiny, 1 out of 200 beers sold. So the number of breweries is not the best indicator of their contribution to volume or really how many can succeed in this environment, because the number of beers you need to get, if we had every American, drink another beer a week, the number of breweries that we could take would just go up exponentially if they're still selling those very, very small volumes that most local breweries sell. So, you're right to bring this up in that that's not always, the openings and closings tell us something. They certainly tell us something about the business environment, where interest rates are, where people's leases and debt levels are. I don't think they always tell us the most about beer health without digging in, understanding what's really driving those trends, and putting it in the wider context of how much volume you really get from your average local brewery.
And on the flip side, like you said, those top 50th breweries sell more beer than the bottom 90% of all breweries combined. And so when we start talking about aggregate sales numbers, and what is happening in the industry, more often than not, that data gets driven by retail sales channels, big box sales, grocery store sales, big box liquor store sales, because, frankly, that's data that can be tracked. They have POS systems. They work with data brokers that can keep track of what they are selling, and then companies like Nielsen and others can report on those sales numbers, and then we have data. But that brewery who's selling a 4-pack out of their tap room, or hand delivering a couple of cases every week to their very small local liquor store, locally owned and operated, like, they're not reporting data. They're not. There's no way to even get that information. So, in a lot of ways, this larger aggregate data that we look at is skewed towards those bigger retail players just because of the nature of the data itself.
Yeah, 100%. That was one of the first things when I took the BA job that I really wrestled with, was that the narratives about all of beer, and craft specifically, were really driven by scan data, as it's known in the industry, those retail scans, and that there wasn't a great way to look at that long tail of breweries, which, again, is a really vital part for craft brewers and makes up a much higher percentage of volume than it does for large brewers, global brewers. We've tried to solve that in some ways over the years. We've worked with point of sale providers to specifically cull data from those tap rooms. But our survey is really one of the best places to get it because it's one of the few times we go to brewers and we do ask them how much the beer they're selling at the brewery so we can get that on-site trend and understand how that's changing. And I think that's one reason too that we always come up with a maybe slightly more positive number than some of the narratives that are out there. Though the scan data is changing too. You talked about how that curve is starting to look a little bit better, and you can see channels now even in scan data where craft is up year to date. So
we should probably explain that. I think we were talking about that before we started here, but some of the Q1 scan data that we have seen doesn't show, like, it's still showing a decline year over year relative to last year, but that rate of decline is about half of what the rate of decline year over year was for quarter one in last year. And so it suggests that rather than seeing like a consistent like linear downward slope, that we're starting to see this kind of curve into a bottom for whatever this kind of correction might be. And and I think that's probably the happiest thing that brewers can look at right now, that even if there is probably some more decline on the horizon, if you know where the bottom looks like it's going to be, then you can at least plan around that and think about what, and I also want to point out that like this bottom that we will be looking at is like, 18 million barrels of production higher than craft beer was, in 2010. And so like, the bottom that we're going to find on this is some of this suggests is so much higher than when, this craft beer thing was catching steam.
They would have dreamed of this bottom in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Yeah. And actually, with scan, you can break it down further. There are channels where craft is growing now. So if we look at craft and convenience, it is up year to date. So, there's pockets that are showing that not only is the bottom in some places, but that we're back to growth in certain channels. And convenience is really small for craft brewers, tends to be less selection, doesn't lend itself well to the types of things that craft brewers typically sell. So maybe not the best indicator
There's
of
10% fruity double IPAs that are selling like crazy right now.
So maybe not the best example for the whole category, but just, another example of that nuance and how you can break these stories down further and you can look at them and you can really then build out a story of, okay, what's working? What does that translate? How can a brewer who maybe doesn't want to sell in convenience still learn lessons from that and apply it to their own framework? And I think there's a lot of signs right now that there's still challenges out there, but the brewers are figuring out new ways to navigate those challenges, and they're finding ways to be more successful than they have in the last few years.
There's also some geographical difference in this, and not every place in the country is experiencing this in the same kind of way. Like, that's the other interesting thing. I think about that William Gibson, the sci-fi author quote where it's like the future is here, but it's unevenly distributed. And I think that that is absolutely the case for even success in craft beer right now. And some of that, depends on the channels that are available in some of those states. Some of that depends on what that competitive landscape looks like. But it is not the same story in every geographical region of the United States.
Yeah, we looked at this by census division, so breaking it down even further from census region, and there was one census division that was up, and this was in production, not in sales, so, in production could be a little bit lumpier. But again, real geographic variation there driven by some people who were outperforming. There was another census division that was very close to breaking even as well, and we had a couple more that were less than -2, and now it has to be balanced, right? If you have -5%, you have numbers that are better than those. That means there's regions that are doing worse. So to tell that full picture, there are challenges. But I think that's certainly true, and that's always going to be true on an ongoing basis. It's going to be true for individual businesses. One of the things I'm trying to talk to brewers constantly, as I'm sure you are, one of the things I always hear about is the weather wherever you are, because for most small operators, the weather is maybe more important than almost any other factor. Here in Colorado, today is an exception where we've just got dumped a foot of snow here in Boulder, but it's been incredibly mild, super nice winter, and people's patios have been full all winter. They're feeling really good. You talk to a brewer in New York this winter, maybe not so good because it's been a really long, cold slog for the East Coast. So there's lots of things that drive that variation. And again, I think we can find stories of success in this. We can find stories that are additional challenge, but it's not one ubiquitous narrative of challenge out there. There's plenty of people who are finding ways to thrive.
Talk to me a little bit about this difference in data or difference in kind of performance along the scale there. I find it interesting that brew pubs have seemed to have had a little more resilience in all of this. Those of us who've been around here long enough have seen the entire arc of the way that craft beer is sold. I remember, I turned 21 in 1995. The way that I would be able to seek it out then is different than, and I remember even in the 2000s, I was living in New York City. We would go up to Pleasantville and go mountain biking at Graham Hills, and then we'd pop over to Captain Lawrence because this new brewery had just opened up in like 2005 there. We go to Captain Lawrence, but at the time, New York State law would not allow the brewery to sell a pint. They could give away free tasters, they could sell you a growler to go, but they couldn't even sell you a pint out of their own tap room. And so we've gone from can't sell you to a pint to then this tap room model that seemed to just fire off in the early 2010s. And then that taproom model has now evolved into, well, if you don't have a food truck with your taproom, it's really hard to keep people there. And that has almost come full circle back to the breweries now adding food or their own food to make sure they have consistent food in order to keep people there. And so we've it's interesting to watch this kind of cyclical thing where the laws changed, allowed some things, but then we end up back where we were in the 90s, where brew pub was still kind of one of the most compelling models for that on-premise type of sale.
Yeah, I mean, that hospitality cycle is always changing. I mean, the maxim that I heard when I got in and was learning more about this was, you need to be thinking about your model every 7 years or it's going to get out of date. And I think that's very true. And you're right to point at some of those changes. We had this huge shift where tap rooms were the answer. Oh, you don't have to deal with the cost and complexity of a kitchen. And that's what everybody wants. They want to go to the industrial warehouse space and feel like that close connection with where it's made and sit on hard stools. And that changes over time, and it's going to vary place to place. It's going to change with your demographic. I went to a brewery recently that was founded by a few people who are a little bit older, and they were saying, we built a brewery that was for us, and one of their rules is every chair has a back because they have reached the age where it's like, I'm not going to go sit on a bar stool that does not have a back. And so they built a brewery, and they very much adapted for that. I think brew pubs are benefiting too from a shift we've seen broadly, and this isn't just in breweries, but in society over the last 5 to 10 years, where people are going not just to drink, but they're going to drink and do something else. And that overall experience matters more. And this will probably shift again. You can see it in kind of popular things. Now there's, dart bars and axe throwing bars and, whatever, put a word in front of it, plus bars. And in breweries, I think it's showing up in needing to have a little bit more investment in that experience. Some of that might be food. I think that's become more important and might be more important going forward as people look to delivery and to go more and, as a bolstering your model. But I also think it's just something that the breweries are having to put more time and intention into. We're seeing, stories out of the Bay Area of people investing in, essentially Adventureland playgrounds for kids to do something while they're there. And I think brew pubs just naturally have some advantages there because going, having a meal, having some food is an experience, and it's something you can layer on in addition to your beer.
It's been interesting to see that. I mean, even here in Colorado, like, a large production brewery like Odell, I think they've even converted all of their licensing over to brew pub licenses instead of production brewery license because Colorado has such great limitations on that of like 60,000 barrels per location. And so that'll cover all of their production with their location. Like they're all good.
Yeah.
And I've, even in Philly, went over to other half while we were up there in Philly, and great food, great restaurant. That is a brewery that has made a name for itself selling, excellent beer and making that argument for quality of beer and trying to drive interest just with that quality of the beer. But even there in their expansion plans, here they are growing with a full-on restaurant, brew pub kind of approach. And I think it was interesting to see that. I always loved that about going to the state of Oregon, because you get into Oregon and their weird laws that required you to sell food if you were going to sell beer meant that everybody had food. And it actually created a really nice, hospitable environment.
I'm glad you mentioned the licenses too, because that's an interesting piece of it, right? Where one of the things that we can't see is everything else they're seeing, selling. We've seen some of this in point of sale data, but one reason brew pubs might be doing better too is that license often allows you to carry a wider range of alcohol. So maybe they have other options that they can bring in those extra people and. One point this leads me to is that those incremental visits who aren't the core beer drinker are one thing I think breweries are relying on more. One of my favorite anecdotal stories is I was talking to a friend, here in Colorado, and they were talking about a local brewery that makes amazing beer that if I or anyone else who's in the beer community or a beer geek thought about, they would just immediately be like, oh, amazing IPAs, amazing, lagers, and when we think about their beer. And this person was sharing with me that they talked to their mother, and their mother thinks of it as her local pizza place because they have amazing square pizza. And she introduced it to him. She was saying, oh yeah, my local pizza place also has pretty good beer. And she knew he liked beer. And she was like, you should go check it out. And he was like, that's an award-winning brewery, Mom. But the way she thought of it, that was her local pizza place. They made good pizza. She goes there to pick up pizza, and occasionally has a beer as well. And I think those are the kind of edges that breweries have needed to find in recent years. It used to be you could make great beer. And I've used two baseball metaphors to talk about this when I've given talks recently that, 10 years ago we were Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. You put up a brewery and there were lines around the block, and now we're Moneyball. You got to scrap and you got to claw and you got to find every edge. And if you're finding the same edge as somebody else, they're pretty quickly probably going to have more resources to put at it. So you got to constantly be thinking about, what is my advantage? How do I think about this differently? And what are those little edges like food, like being the local pizza place for somebody's mom that allow you to differentiate and pull new people in?
100%. I was at Westbound and Down here meeting up with some friends for some beer, and there was a woman there who was there for the gluten-free pizza and drinking wine because she's celiac. But, it's a brewery, but there she is, with her dog on the patio, drinking wine, eating their pizza, same kind of thing. I think that actually suggests another question that I have. When we see this performance of breweries in the current economic environment, in the context of the entire bev alc sector, craft breweries in general, and craft breweries in particular, seem to be significantly outperforming other categories like craft spirits, significantly outperforming wine. If you look at some of the dynamics that are affecting the rest of beverage alcohol, and I have kind of thrown this question out there before, why are we talking about the death of craft beer when craft beer is doing better than these other categories? Should we not change that conversation and be talking about what is craft beer doing right that some of these other categories of beverage alcohol are not doing, and what are some of those inbuilt advantages? And I think that there is something to this idea of the tap room being almost a fast, casual, nice, high quality, world class in some cases, but also accessible. And there is something to that, and you layer in food. Anyway, let's unpack that. But first, today's episode is brought to you by ADM. Are you ready to shake up the beverage world? ADM is passionate about helping you craft your next breakthrough. From cutting-edge natural ingredients like hops to advanced technologies, ADM brings together science and creativity to elevate taste, quality, and recipe design. Whether you're developing a beer innovation or a bold new flavor experience, ADM is your trusted partner in innovation. Let's create something extraordinary, because the future of beer and brewing starts with inspired ideas and exceptional expertise. ADM is where nature meets precision. Learn more at adm.com/alcohol. And running a brewery means juggling a lot, managing production, serving guests, selling online, and keeping everything moving behind the scenes. That's where Arrived comes in. What started as a point-of-sale system has grown into a technology your brewery runs on, built specifically for the teams behind great beer. Unlike generic systems, Arrived brings together taproom service, online sales, brewery management, payments, reporting, and growth tools into one complete platform. So instead of bouncing between systems, you can brew, serve, and sell all in one place. Learn more at arrived.com. That's ARRYVED.com. unpack.com. Also, pumps are critical to any advanced homebrewing setup, from mash recirculation to wort transfer and even for cleaning. A quality pump is a key part of every brew day. The SS Brew Pump from SS Brewtech is engineered to tackle even the messiest brew days. Featuring an IP55 water resistance rating, an easy-to-use DIN head with 360-degree rotation, and a flow rate of up to 11 gallons per minute, it has the power to keep your brew day moving. Visit www.ssbrewtech.com/pump to learn more about how the SS Brew Pump can upgrade your home brewery. Let's talk about this kind of category as a whole, Bart. You all look at this, and you look at this in aggregate, and there are some interesting stories. I saw something in the ACSA, American Craft Spirits Association data, like last year, they saw something like a 25% decline in the number of licensed craft distilleries year over year. Like there's some other reasoning behind that, but it's still a pretty dramatic contrast to what the dynamics that we're seeing in craft beer. Do you have any thoughts on, what are some of the things underpinning that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges out there that face commonly small producers, in terms of rising cost and access to market, and then beverage alcohol more broadly. It was a challenging environment for all beverage alcohol in 2025. So when you put it in that context, craft beer stops being unique, and I think some of the models actually shine very well. This is true in broader beer distribution. Data on draft beer suggests it was down 5% in distributed draft. So brew pubs at -2 and tap rooms at -4 are actually beating the trends. They're doing something to pull in more people and sell more beer on site than overall draft. And to the larger picture, it's a tough time to be a small business. Costs are going up. You've got less ability to push back on those. Distribution in beverage alcohol is consolidating rapidly. We're, not just within beer, but within total beverage alcohol, as these distribution markets come together. And then, separately, when we think about all beverage alcohol, and I think these stories are overblown too and overwritten, but I think there are changes in how people are drinking, in what total beverage alcohol consumption levels look like. It's not the death of drinking in the same way that it's not the death of craft beer, but it's been a tough year for beverage alcohol, and producers are having to navigate this. And so you add those kind of business challenges on with these overall market and consumer challenges. And, I think you can put a spin on this, and that's not to say craft beer's number are good, but I think you can put a spin on this that craft brewers are adapting and innovating remarkably well in such a tough environment.
I've talked to Lester Jones about this in the past, and I remember he had this interesting data point that when you look at the survey data of number of people who have had a beer in the last 30 days, the percentage is something like 40% of the population. And it's the same exact number as 20 years ago. The same exact, like this argument that people are drinking less or that people aren't drinking is the wrong way to frame this. The way to frame it is that people are still drinking, but even those individuals who are drinking are maybe have changed their own consumption patterns and are consuming a little bit less beer. They're not going, and so the argument isn't cold turkey. It's not like, those people aren't drinking beer anymore. They're drinking beer less often.
Yeah.
And so in that case, what are the reasons for that? Is that health? Is there some other, personal reason that's driving that? Is the category not compelling to them anymore? Is the experience, that is their palate different? Are they in a different financial, like there are a whole bunch of ways that you can try to pull apart the reason for that. But, the argument is not that people just flat out have gone from 100 to 0. They've gone from 100 to, well, not 100, they're going from 5 beers a week to 3 beers a week, or 10 beers a week to 7 beers a week. And when you start doing that math in aggregate, it starts adding up to a lot, when you take that across all of those individuals.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think there's places we can point to that there clearly are shifts. One of them is new legal drinking age consumers. And there's no great data on exactly how much people drink, but we have some really good data on how much people spend from the BLS Consumer Expenditure Survey that we've had year over year for a long time. And it became pretty clear in the data that 10 or 15 years ago, the youngest legal drinking age households were spending less on beverage alcohol. Now the good news for any producers out there is that data hasn't showed up in the 25 to 34-year-old cohort. So suggests people are kind of coming into beverage alcohol differently than they used to, but they're returning to
Are you saying they have kids and then they start drinking, Bart? Because that tracks, anecdotally, that tracks with me.
I think it's, that it takes them a little bit longer. And, and some of this comes from a really good thing. We've got 30 years now of decline in underage drinking that, people who are under legal drinking age, increasingly in surveys, you look at high school seniors, they're drinking less and less. And that's a good thing. And I think it, reflects, societal conversations, messages of responsibility coming from the industry itself. And that means when you turn 21, you're much less likely to have had a drink than maybe when we were under 21. I won't speak for you, but I may have had a beer before I was 21. And
I never did.
And
not once.
Not once. And it just means it takes longer to figure out those occasions. So that's one place. But I mean, a lot of this narrative's overblown. I'm going to go on a rant for 2 seconds. My biggest pet peeve is when you read these articles and they interview somebody who's in their 30s and they say like, oh, I'm drinking less than I was in my 20s. And then they take that as a trend that like, everybody is drinking. Everybody drinks less in their 30s than their 20s. If we didn't, we would all die. Like I remember my 20s and I remember my 30s. Like that's something that happens to everyone. That is not a sign that all of society is drinking less. Find somebody in their 20s, compare them to somebody in their 20s, then we have a conversation.
I even find I've got kids that are 17 and 20, and I find a difference even between the two of them. That the 20-year-old is less motivated around that than the 17-year-old. And so I'm wondering, like, even if we look at this, that there's some generational data, that may even shift with those as they go into legal drinking age based on where they were during the pandemic, that it changed some of those socialization patterns and, kind of threw some things off. And I think we're going to keep kind of seeing some feedback on that. But then again, even the even younger generation, we've now got kids. My kids grew up going to breweries with me. And so for them, it's not a world where craft beer is new or exciting or something fresh, or now there's all this opportunity. It's like they've just been doing this for all of their conscious lives and it's just normal. And I think there's also this potential kind of nostalgic factor in another 5 or 10 years and we're already starting to see some of that nostalgia factor come around even in craft beer itself with the craft brewers making 90s craft beer styles just for the cheekiness of the whole thing. And, and so we've become more self-referential there. It's all just to say that, there's no finality to these trends. These are still dynamic and they're going to remain dynamic and they're going to continue to unfold in different kinds of ways. But I do want to talk about, how we frame some of that messaging, because so much of this has been so much of the state of the industry presentation for so many years has focused on metrics like these volume numbers. We're going to hit 20% of the market by 2020, and as we've just been talking about now, like it's really hard to catch to sum up the state of craft beer in an easily digestible, easily shareable thing that you can put, because it's so nuanced, because there's so many different aspects of it. So how, as we move forward in this era of craft beer, as we see more and different kinds of brewers get involved, I see interesting, folks come through our Brewery Accelerator program, like Craig, who's in LA, who's started up a brewery out there in a beer desert, serving an audience that has not been served by craft beer, making it relevant to an audience that may have never considered themselves craft beer drinkers. We're seeing this kind of thing happen over and over again. We're seeing this broadening of the overall beer narrative. We're seeing, breweries like Vine Street in Kansas City, coming at it with their approach, reaching, their audience and building a relevant experience, and also making some killer beer in the process. We're seeing this whole different, craft beer and craft brewers are approaching audience in a much more broad and nuanced way than maybe ever before. And so much of this is happening, on the street level, tap room by tap room, and not, case equivalent by case equivalent at giant retail. How do we, as the entire world of beer, start to create some messaging around that can work against this weird, hyperbolic, factually incorrect, and data ignorant argument that craft beer is somehow dying?
Yeah, I think you started to do it there, right? It's the taking it away from these high level aggregate stats. And, I'll raise my hand and say the BA probably played some role in, telling that story and using stats to tell a story in the era of growth. I mean, that was one of the things we could point to and say, here's an example of growth. And today I think it has to be much more at that individual brewery and community level and talk about what they're doing to introduce a new place, to introduce a new community, to do something new and different, and start show that vitality, that excitement, that innovation, that it still exists. And, it exists even in a number that's, negative on the top line. But it exists at the brewery level, at the community level. And over time, that's going to percolate, right? If you get those kind of continued little pockets of growth, they're going to add up and they're going to do more. So we were talking about this before the show started recording. That's something that we're thinking about. How do we tell those stories? Because it's hard, right? It's hard to tell. You can't tell 9,000 stories at the same time when, a reporter from X magazine calls. You can't say, okay, check out what every single brewery in the country is doing. You need ways to condense that. But I think it's starting to understand that there are common threads there in how brewers are thoughtfully connecting with their community, with new communities, doing something different. And that hasn't changed, right? Maybe it looks a little bit different than it did in an era where you could suddenly be rolling out new beer styles every week, and, telling a story on kind of how hospitality models or go-to-market is changing can be a little bit harder and harder to collectively capture. But I think there's lots of opportunities to celebrate all the exciting stuff that's going on in beer. I know when I'm talking to operators, they're thinking about this stuff more than ever before. That was part of us bringing in Will Gadara for CBC this year, was very much a lean into that hospitality side that I think a lot of operators are thinking about right now. So it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be challenging to tell that kind of atomized story in one voice, but that's one we're thinking about. And I think it's, up to a lot of local people too, to tell that story locally, because I can't tell the story of Sonoma County or Kansas City or, LA in the same way that people in those markets can and can really give character and flavor to it.
I think it's so important, to continue looking at, this world of craft beer, not as if there is just one goal for it either, and I think that, there's not one goal of becoming the next Sierra Nevada or the next Sam Adams. The thing that has always made craft beer so rich is the variety of experience. And we have that brewery that's making 250 barrels of mixed fermentation beer, but also has a James Beard nomination and an amazing chef, with their making food from their garden. And you've got, then you've got something like Treehouse in Massachusetts, like making just an enormous amount of beer that they sell directly to consumers in a way that, is a model that almost no one else can replicate, and just due to being at the right place at the right time with the right kind of product. We run into this danger of trying to think that there is some singular model that brewers should chase and that there's one idea of success, but there is just this like broad multiplicity of successes and possibilities that are available to craft brewers, and finding some way to like encompass all of those different definitions of success. It's hard to wrap up and roll up into one kind of thing.
Yeah. One of the things I tried to lean on at CBC was the concept of independence. We talk about independent craft breweries a lot. Our seal that differentiates them is, says independence on it. Independent, I should say. I should know our own seal better than that. And I think independence is really the superpower that ties all these stories together. It allows you to do something that, when you start down that path, people say that's crazy, but then works out, and suddenly your treehouse with, a golf course and amazing pizza and all the awesome stuff they're doing. Going back to CBC and Will Gadara, I mean, that was another reason I liked him and picking his message, and, trying to replicate what was the top restaurant, Michelin starred and all that is not applicable for most breweries, but trying to do what they did, which is say, if we want to be the best, how can we think about this differently? I think is applicable to all breweries. They went out there and they realized we're not going to pass when they were the 50th best restaurant in the world. I don't know if you know his story, out of 50, and they took that a little bit hard. And then looking back, they looked at it and they said, okay, how are we going to pass these other 49? And it's not by just making better food or having better, plates or whatever it is, because all of them are going to be doing that too. It's thinking about this differently, and they leaned on the idea of unreasonable hospitality. And I think that's the thing that independence allows breweries. You can look at this from any way. You want to get crazy about malt or mixed fermentation. I'm a member of a brewery CSA with a brewery here in Colorado that's really into spontaneous fermentation and mixed fermentation. And the brewer, he geeks out on this in a way that nobody does, and sends samples to labs to get analyzed, to compare them with lambics. And he is doing something that just is so far out of the left field that it makes them unique and different and interesting. And you just want to get close to those passionate people who are just doing something weird and crazy. And that's the path forward for craft beer, right? It's 9,000 people doing that in their own way, in their own community. And that doesn't always have to be crazy beer. It can be, we're going to get crazy about our pizza, and we're going to make, every mom in the tri-state area think, oh, that's the best pizza place. And yeah, we're going to make beer too. So I think there's a million unlimited paths for breweries to do that. And maybe our role, right, is then to tie that together as one story of independent beer and show that these are all different flavors of this wonderful tapestry that makes American craft brewing so special.
One of the things I love most about craft beer is that there are very few categories of food or beverage where you can taste the absolute best of that at a price that anyone can afford. And I can go, drive down to Cannonball Creek here in Golden and drink a gold medal West Coast IPA that has been judged the best in the world this year, and I can drink it for $7 or $8 for a pint. You show me a place where I can drink some of the best wine in the world as judged by the best sommeliers for $7 for a glass. It doesn't exist. Does not exist. Show me a place where I can have some of the best, most highly rated food, for $7 or $10 or even $70 a plate. It does not exist. Or there you could argue about that. There are some amazing street food options that will probably challenge some of those best Michelin restaurants. But my point is still there. Show me the best bourbon in the world, and you're not going to get it for $7 a glass. You're not going to get it for $17 a glass, generally speaking. Beer has this unique positioning where the absolute best in the world is available in a quantity and at a quality and therefore a price point that is accessible to so many people. And I think that is something that we need to keep celebrating, and we need to keep arguing for. We need to keep pointing out there in the broader meta narrative that and that I think is why it is uniquely positioned in this entire world of beverage alcohol and hospitality to be more successful than the overall general market at this point.
Yeah, I'll say I'm of two minds about this, because at one level, I 100% agree. It is amazing that you can drink, the best beers in the world at a price that's relatively affordable. And, we use the phrase affordable luxury a lot. I used to live in Northern California, so I spent a lot of time in Napa, Sonoma, and very quickly you realize that it's just not accessible to the nicest stuff unless you have a bankroll that has always been much larger than the one that I have. So one level, I think that is amazing, and I think that's one thing that's made beer accessible, right? It's the beverage of everybody. At the same time, I think brewers are thinking about price more than ever before, and that is something that's still a barrier for some people to come into craft, and they need to be thinking about what is it that really, and you win the medal at World Beer Cup or GABF for the best IPA in the world, and people are probably going to say that. But for the typical brew pub or tap room, a lot of people blanch at $8, $9 pints. You compare it to Screaming Eagle wine, and it's a screaming deal. But if you compare it to beer at just a bar down the street, it might not be. And so I think that's going to be one of the challenges.
And you saw the two sides of that even in the top 50 production data this year, where Outlaw, Tivoli, and there was another brand.
Garage Beer.
Beer.
Yeah, you're thinking exactly the way I am.
They both popped up in your top 50 at the same time that Maine Beer and Russian River are also there in the top 50, selling a whole lot of beer in 500 milliliter glass bottles at a price point that is significantly higher than what Garage Beer is selling for.
You've teed me up perfectly. Yeah, you've teed me up perfectly, which is just to say that I think breweries really need to be thinking about who their customer is and what their value prop is. And sometimes it's, hey, we're going to sell you the best beer in the world at an affordable price, and sometimes it's, hey, we're going to sell you local community, and it's going to be a little bit cheaper, and that's fine. And that's what we're doing because that's who our customers are, who we're trying to invite in, and we want you to stay and have, that second pint as opposed to just having one amazing one.
Sure. Well, let's close here by what that means for the BA. You as the BA as an organization has to remain dynamic as the entire market changes, how you serve that membership, because we're talking about this diversity within craft beer itself, and that is a lot of different kinds of concerns for brewers at different scales, different levels, like in different parts of the country, making different kinds of things, selling in different kinds of ways, and being one organization for all of them is it's an interesting challenge for you all.
Yeah, it's a fun challenge, and it's one that I get excited to wake up every day and do. So I'll start with that. Some things don't change, right? We're still going to do government affairs and some of those kind of more classic trade association things like lobbying, events. I think it changes, and we've talked a lot about how we tell the story. So it changes our promote activities. I think over time that you need a different set of promote activities in an era where things are more challenging and maybe those stories are a little bit more diverse than they used to be, whereas we could have a more consolidated, simplified story in that era of growth. I think it changes our resources too, how we're educating members. We spend a lot of time investing a lot of time and money in technical resources for members across a wide range of subjects. And I think it's still important to have those resources in that database. But I think we've seen in the last few years that those business challenges, how to operate successfully in hospitality, navigate these distribution changes have become more important. So, if I were to boil this down, it's really simple. We need to look and see how the challenges of our members are changing and then provide collective resources, collective voice that helps them navigate those challenges. And that's going to look real differently today than it did, 5 or 10 years ago when, 10 years ago when I started, we were still trying to help people understand, discover craft beer. We were educating about those styles. I don't think that need has gone away, but it's changed. And today, craft beer is ubiquitous. And so we still need new people to be discovering it, but we need to be telling that story in a different way where you can walk into any bar and there's going to be something hoppy on tap than we were in an era where people were looking at cloudy beer and wondering, is there something wrong with this? Whereas today they know what it is, they're excited about it or they're not. That's a different story. So our challenge is going to be constantly changing with that of our members.
So with your Bart Watson crystal ball, what's craft beer look like 5 years from now and 10 years from now?
Can I steal the Jerry Steinman, my crystal ball is broken line? No, I mean, I think it's, I think we're going to see a bifurcation in the market. We're already seeing it where you're going to see more and more kind of hyper local, people really hyper focused on their community, and then distribution kind of scaling up with groups and larger size. That'll probably swing back.
Squeezing the middle class.
Yeah.
I think it's a common theme in the American economy.
I mean, I think it's a thing, that we've seen and is going to happen more of. And that's not to say you can't exist in that middle, right? But you just got to be really focused on what the strategy is to hang out at that middle size. So I think that's one of the things. I mean, 10 years from now, I think it's going to be thriving. I think we're going to see more variety than ever before. I'm sure that will create headaches for an association that's supposed to kind of represent this big tent, but it's one we welcome. And generally the BA ethos has always been to broaden the tent as our members have gotten more diverse and that they have looked more different over time, which has generally been the case. So, I mean, I think we're going to see people navigate this. I don't think we're ever going to return to the boom era of growth that we had where we were growing double digits 8 out of 10 years again. But a world in which, at a local level, craft is healthy, successful, thriving, growing, I think is highly likely in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, definitely a different market. Brewers are going to have to be focused on running smart businesses and watching, managing money in, money out, maintaining that quality despite some of these pricing challenges, the cost of ingredients, cost of fuel, like all the things, are coming at us. But at the same time, I think that this is the best time to be making beer in the history of beer. And I will continue saying that. I will continue making that point because as challenging for some as some of the sales and some of the business side can be, I think we can't take for granted just how when you look at the average quality across so many breweries, the ability, in 2015, if I tried to find a Treehouse quality hazy IPA anywhere outside of that very small area of Vermont and Massachusetts, it was extremely hard. And now you can find one anywhere in the country. If I want to find a lager, a well-made lager that is as good as the best or some of the best in Germany, I can pretty much find that every state, most major cities, made by a local brewer there. The quality and the kind of dispersion of that quality across this craft beer landscape, we have never seen anything like it in the history of craft beer before, and we should never take that for granted, what we absolutely have right now in 2026.
Yeah, love it. I'll say I'm not a beer maker, but as a beer drinker, I think it's the best time to be a beer drinker. It's amazing, the options that you have out there. We shouldn't take it for granted. We should celebrate it, and that's what we're going to try to do.
100%, and that is a great place to bring it to a close. Don't throw good money at bad equipment. Invest in a solution from GG Chillers that grows with your brewery. Berkeley Yeast Dry Tropics London offers their best-selling liquid yeast strain with the ease of use of dry yeast. PacTex handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable. Indie Hops Lorient has found its way into the hearts of lager lovers across the country. The Midea 50/50 Flex can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Old Orchard is your one-stop shop for fruit juice concentrates, purees, and blends. ADM combines science and creativity to elevate taste, quality, and recipe design. Arrived brings together all the tools you need in one complete platform, and the SS Brew Pump from SS Brewtech is engineered to tackle even the messiest brew days. If you've enjoyed this conversation, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, and support us in bringing you great conversations like this and fighting the good fight alongside the BA for craft beer and these negative narratives that I think don't accurately describe the data that we're seeing around the market today. Bart, if people want to learn more about the BA, what you all are doing, and these activities that you all are involved in to secure the future of craft beer, where can they learn more about you all?
Our website is brewersassociation.org. You can read more consumer-centric content on craftbeer.com. And then we run the Great American Beer Festival. So if you're interested in tasting some of the best beers in the world this October, you can check that out. I should know the website. I do not, but you search
GreatAmericanBeerFestival.com.
There we go.
I use it so often to look up award winners as we were thinking about how we're doing. Anyway. Yeah.
Yes, GreatAmericanBeerFestival.com.
Bart,
Thank you.
My oldest son is going to be 21 for GABF this year. He turns 21 this summer.
I would love to drink a beer with him at GABF. It's going to be amazing. We're going to be outside this year, so check it out.
Can't wait. Thanks for talking with me about this. Obviously, it's a subject close to my heart, and there's conversations going out there in the world. And I figured it would be better just to go straight to the source. So glad you're close. Great talking with you about it. Cheers.
Thank you.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.